In a disaster they may have caused or enabled, leave it to some Republicans to make everything worse. Hello, everybody. David Schuster here. The Republican governor of Texas is now being widely described as tone deaf and insane. Amidst the ongoing search and recovery operations following the deadly floods, Governor Greg Abbott erupted over a key question.
I'm going to use your words. Who's to blame? Know this. That's the word choice of losers. Let me explain one thing about Texas. And that is, Texas, every square inch of our state, cares about football. You could be in Hunt, Texas, Huntsville, Texas, Houston, Texas, any size community, they care about football. High school, Friday night lights, college football, or pro. And know this, every football team makes mistakes.
Yes, he compared the deaths of more than 100 people, including dozens of children, to a football team that throws an interception, fumbles the ball, and costs their team a score. And Abbott kept going.
The losing teams are the ones that try to point out who's to blame. The championship teams are the ones that say, don't worry about it, man, we got this. We're going to make sure that we go score again, that we're going to win this game. The way winners talk is not to point fingers. They talk about solutions. What Texas is all about is solutions.
What Texas is about is solutions, and that's fine, but solving and preventing problems in how our government prevents death is different than how a football team, even in Texas, dissects losing and prepares for the next game. But don't take my word for it. Citizens of Texas have exploded at Governor Abbott. The comments to reporters and on social media include, "This man is unequivocally the most callous, incapable governor the state has ever endured. Every single disaster we encounter is met with his dismissive conjecture. Calling people losers for wanting answers and making an effing football analogy when 100 plus people are dead and 160 plus are missing is insane. You don't get to play the everyone makes mistakes card when this was avoidable. And the losers are the leaders of a state that has a budget surplus and refused to pay for sirens and alert systems in an area called Flash Flood Alley because it cost money." Several news organizations are reporting that 8 years ago, Kerr County in Texas sought grant money for new flood warning gauges and disaster sirens along the Guadalupe River. FEMA would have funded 75% of the $1 million grant if the state covered 25%. But Texas leaders didn't want to spend the $250,000 for Kerr County. As recently as last month, Governor Abbott's team was asked about federal disaster money and grant help and said the state could handle any disaster on its own. Well, now Governor Abbott is calling for an emergency legislative session to consider flood warning money the state could have accepted years ago. In sports, I believe this is what you call a do-over. Of course, in sports, you aren't talking about doing over a bad decision that may have contributed to the deaths of hundreds of people. Not to be outdone by Governor Abbott in sheer mendacity and insensitivity, there was Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem. Never mind the antiquated local warning systems, Noem insists the federal response to the Texas floods was immediate.
I think what we've seen here is exactly what President Trump has envisioned for FEMA, is immediately allowing the state to do the response and supporting them in every way that they can. So this response was driven by Governor Abbott and his emergency management director and the local officials that were on the ground. And we were immediately there to fill in the gaps where they needed and to give them their disaster declaration as soon as possible, which happened almost immediately as soon as the governor asked. That's the FEMA and how it should operate, rather than how it operated under the Biden administration and previous administrations, where it was slow to respond, slow to get resources there.
The Biden administration was slow to get resources to disasters. Well, that's interesting because there are now multiple reports that in the wake of this Texas disaster, the Trump administration, because of new cost controls on FEMA, was slow to release funds and resources to Texas first responders.
Sources inside the agency are telling CNN that officials were ready to get urban search and rescue teams in position when the water was starting to rise on Friday. But a new rule that was put in place by the secretary required her personal sign-off first. That sign-off, multiple sources told CNN, didn't come until Monday, more than 72 hours after the flooding began.
So it took 72 hours or 3 days for Nome to release the federal money and resources that would have helped Texas authorities from the start. Now, it sounds like Nome was waiting for Texas officials to ask for the federal help, but in previous administrations, including the Biden administration, federal help was dispatched immediately. Nobody at FEMA waited around for overwhelmed local and state leaders to get their act together. Kristi Noem made another wild assertion. This one is about the capabilities of the federally run National Weather Service warnings. Analysts say those warnings to Texas officials did not come early enough.
We were notified, but we only had a couple hours of notice before this flash flood came. Was the National Weather Service proactive? What was the process that was followed? And the National Weather Service did send out notifications, gave as much time as they could with the tools that they have. And we actually had staff on the ground that was more than would have been in the past because of the holiday vacation. But frankly, the National Weather Service under President Trump has been working to put in new technology and a new system because it's been neglected for years. It's an ancient system that needed to be upgraded. And so President Trump recognized that right away and got to work on it when he came into office in January. But that installation is not complete and that technology isn't fully installed, but the alerts went out.
The upgrades are not fully installed. Trump promised a new National Weather Service system. Several news organizations have fact-checked this claim and say it is absolutely false. There is no record of Donald Trump ever saying or promising, even in position papers, that his administration would upgrade the National Weather Service systems. According to federal databases scoured by roll call, there were several upgrades under President Biden, but nothing under Trump. A few months ago, the Trump administration fired or doged hundreds of employees at the National Weather Service and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, and there are reports that the field offices and weather stations in Texas were understaffed in the days leading up to the flood. Journalists have now asked officials at the Trump White House and the Department of Homeland Security, what upgrades is Noem talking about? And the officials are not commenting. In other words, even Trump officials know that Noem is making things up out of whole cloth while trying to blame problems on the Biden administration. This makes Noem a liar, and under Governor Abbott's logic, a loser. Still, perhaps we shouldn't be surprised by the callous approach of Governor Abbott and the incompetence and shamelessness of Kristi Noem. These are government leaders who have proven repeatedly their priority is not truth or accountability. These Republicans simply want to please Donald Trump and avoid any examination of what has gone wrong. And as depressing as that sounds, well, it gets even worse when you consider there are no more games and no more seasons for the hundreds of people who died. And let's be clear, this was a catastrophe that could have possibly been prevented. I'm David Schuster. Thanks for joining us.